The old men had a word for a winter like this one, and they would not say it aloud, because to name a thing is to call it closer. Sitsíki, little crane, though she had long since grown too tall and too tired for the name, stood at the door of the lodge in the last gray light and looked out over the camp along the Two Medicine and counted the smokes. There should have been 40 fires threading up into the iron sky. She counted 11. Some of the dark lodges held people who had gone to relatives in other camps. Some held people who had gone nowhere at all and would not rise again until the ground softened enough to receive them, which would not be for a long time yet, because the ground that winter was hard as the floor of the world. Behind her, in the smoke-dim warmth that was not warm enough, her sister's 2 children slept the thin sleep of the hungry, and her sister did not sleep, because her sister was 3 days dead and wrapped in the last good robe, and waiting on the scaffold Sitsíki had built with her own hands in the frozen cotton woods, because there was no one left with the strength to help her build it, and the ground would not open for a burying. She was 26 winters old. She had a healer's hands and a midwife's knowledge, taught to her by her grandmother, who had died in the autumn early and had been called lucky for it. The buffalo had not come. That was the whole of it and the end of it, and there was no arguing with it. For as long as there had been people, there had been the buffalo, black rivers of them wide as the day, so many that a child could not imagine their ending any more than the ending of the grass or the sky. And then the hide hunters had come with their long guns that killed from a distance no arrow could dream, and they had killed and killed, not for meat, not for robes to keep a family warm, but for the hides alone, stripping the great bodies and leaving the meat to the wolves and the sun, whole valleys of it rotting, hills of white bone rising where the black rivers had run. And in the space of a few years, a thing that should have taken 1,000, the buffalo were gone, not scarce, gone. The scouts rode out in the autumn, as they always had, to find the herds and bring the word so the people could make their winter meat, and they rode further than they had ever ridden. And they came back with their faces closed, and they said the thing no one had ever had to say before. There are none anywhere. We found bones, and we found the tracks of last year, and we found nothing living. They are gone. And the agency, which had promised beef and flour in exchange for the land and the old free life, sent beef that was mostly bone and flour that was mostly sweepings, and then sent less, and then sent nothing, while the agent's own smoke-house was full, and the trader at the agency store grew fat. And the word came down the wire from Washington that the appropriation was delayed, that the paperwork was not in order, that patience was a virtue in the primitive, and the people began to die. They died quietly. That was the thing Sitsíki could not forgive and would never forget. How quietly hunger takes a people. There was no battle in it, no enemy to strike, nothing to be brave against. There was only the slow going out of the fires, one and then another, the children growing too weak to cry, the old ones giving their share to the young, and then simply not waking, the strong growing thin and the thin growing gone. She had used everything her grandmother taught her, and it was not enough because there is no medicine for an empty belly but food, and there was no food. Her sister had given her share to the children. Sitsíki had known she was doing it, and had fought her over it, and had lost, because you cannot make a mother eat, while her children go hungry. There is no strength on earth greater than that refusal. And so her sister had thinned and grayed and taken the coughing sickness that always came for the weak, and 3 days ago she had held Sitsíki's hand and said, "You will keep them alive. Say it to me." And Sitsíki had said it. She had promised it into her sister's failing ear the way you promise the dying anything, because the promise is the last gift you can give them, and she had meant it with the whole of what was left of her. And now her sister lay on the scaffold in the cottonwoods, and the two children slept behind her, and the promise sat in her chest like a stone she had swallowed and could not bring up. The children. Maki, the boy, was 7 and had his mother's grave patience and his dead father's wide, dark eyes. Poita, the girl, was 4 and still, God help her, sometimes laughed. A small, astonished sound that broke Sitsiki's heart every time she heard it, because she did not know how many more times she would hear it. They were not her children. They were her children now. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked among the people. No child was ever without mothers, but it had never before had to work in a winter with no food in it. And she did not know how she was going to do the thing she had promised to do. That night, the last of the meat was gone. She had made a broth of it, a broth that was mostly melted snow and the memory of meat. And she had given it to the children and told them she had eaten already, which was the oldest lie and the kindest. And the boy had looked at her over his cup with his father's steady eyes, and had not believed her and had not said so, because he had learned already, at 7, that some lies are gifts. She did not sleep. She sat by the small fire and fed it splinters, because wood, too, was running out, and she made herself think, coldly, the way her grandmother had taught her to think when the thinking was hard. Fear is a fog. Walk through it and out the other side to where the choices are. There were choices. There were not many, and none of them were good, and that was itself a kind of clarity. She could stay, and they would die. That was not a choice so much as the absence of one. She could take the children south and east to the agency and throw herself on the mercy of the agent. And she had seen what the agent's mercy was worth, had stood in his ration line and watched him weigh out starvation with a clean pencil and a tired, charitable face. And she thought the children would die on the road or die in the crowd of the dying at the agency, where the sickness was worst. Or she could do the mad thing, the thing that had been sitting at the back of her mind for 2 days, like an animal in the brush. There was a place, 3 days' hard travel to the west and north, up where the plains broke against the front of the mountains. A wintering place, a road ranch and trading post kept by a man the people spoke of the way they spoke of weather that might kill you or might not. A hide man, one of the very men whose long guns had emptied the world. He had killed his thousands in the good years and grown rich on it, and then the herds had ended and taken his trade with them, and he had drifted up against the mountains and squatted there in a cabin with a few horses and a stock of goods and traded with whoever came by, Indian or white or the Métis freighters who still moved through that country, and he kept to himself, and men said he drank, and men said he had killed a partner over money, and men said a great many things, and the one thing they all agreed on was that he had meat. A hunter of his kind, even with the buffalo gone, would have laid in elk and deer and antelope against the winter. A man like that would not be hungry. She did not let herself think about what it meant to walk her sister's children 40 miles through the killing cold to the door of one of the men who had made this winter. She only thought, he has food, and I have nothing, and I have hands that are worth something, and I will trade whatever there is to trade. She was a healer. She was a worker. She could tan and sew and cook and doctor. And if it came to it, she made herself look at this too, straight on. The way she made herself look at wounds. She was a woman, and men were men, and she would spend whatever had to be spent because she had made a promise, and a promise is a debt, and the children did not know the price and never would. In the gray before dawn she woke the boy and told him they were going on a journey, and he did not ask where or why. He only nodded and began, at 7 years old, to gather what small things there were to gather. She rolled the sleeping girl in the good robe. She took the last of the wood in a bundle, and her grandmother's medicine, and her knife, and the awl, and sinew, and a little bag of the dried calmus she had been saving against the very end, and she stood a moment in the doorway of the lodge that had been her sister's and her mother's, and looked at the cold hearth, and then she went out into the dark and did not look back, because there was nothing behind her now but scaffolds. She stopped once at the edge of the camp at the cottonwoods, and she stood beneath her sister, and she did not weep, because weeping freezes on your face in that cold, and she could not afford the water or the weakness. She only said, "Lo, I am keeping them alive. I am doing it now. Watch me do it." And then she turned the old dun horse's head to the northwest, toward the wall of the mountains standing blue and enormous and indifferent along the edge of the world. And she began to walk. A man who winters alone against the mountains winters there for a reason, and among such men the reasons are never happy ones. Everyone who spoke of the Hyde Man agreed he was dangerous and disagreed about everything else. Some said he was American, some said he had been a soldier once and deserted, some said he had a wife somewhere back east who thought him dead and was not wrong in any way that mattered. They said he had killed a man. They said he drank until the drink ran out and then went hard and silent until a freighter brought more. They said the buffalo's ending had broken something in him that had not been whole to begin with. They said he did not like company and would as soon put a bullet past your ear as trade with you, and that the only reason to go to him at all was that he had what a starving country did not: powder, lead, flour, coffee, and meat hanging frozen in his shed. Most of it, Sitsíki would learn, was closer to true than the men who said it knew, and all of it missed the one thing that mattered, which was the size of the wound the man carried and had been trying for 3 winters to drink and freeze and starve out of himself, and could not, because a man cannot kill the part of himself that knows what he has done, though God knows this one had tried. The journey nearly killed them. The first day was only cold. The second day the wind came, the true wind of that country, the one that comes down off the mountains and the northern ice with nothing to stop it for 1,000 miles, and it drove the snow flat and sideways and stole the world, and Sitsíki walked with the dun's tail wrapped in her fist, and the girl bound to her chest inside the robe, and the boy riding, because he could no longer walk, and she navigated by the wind alone, keeping it on the same quarter of her face for hour after hour, praying it did not shift and turn her in a circle to die. The night between the second day and the third was the worst thing she had ever lived through. She dug into the lee of a drift and pulled the horse down and put the children against its belly and lay over them, and the cold was a living thing that pressed its mouth to every seam of them and breathed, and she stayed awake by biting the inside of her cheek, because she knew that sleep in that cold was only death wearing a gentle face, and she talked to the children all night, low, telling them the old stories. The story of the boy who went to the sky, and the story of how the people were given the pipe, not because they could hear her over the wind, but because, as long as she was talking, she was awake, and as long as she was awake, they were alive. Near the dawn of the third day the wind fell, the way it does, all at once, into a silence so total it rang. And when the light came up gray and pitiless over a world scoured white and blue, she got them up, all of them still living, a thing she would count among the plain miracles of her life. And she saw the mountains, close and enormous ahead, and against their feet a thread of smoke rising straight up in the new stillness, and she turned toward it. The place came out of the white slowly, a long, low cabin of squared timber, a pole corral with a few shag-coated horses standing hip-shot and miserable, a shed, a stack of split wood taller than a man, and the smoke rising from a stone chimney built with more care than the rest. A dog began to bark, a deep chesty sound, and then went silent, called off by something. The man came out of the cabin with a rifle in the crook of his arm. He did not raise it. He held it the way a man holds a thing he has held so long it is part of his arm, and he stood on the step and watched them come, a big man gone gaunt, with a heavy beard going gray and pale eyes, set deep in a weathered face. Eyes that had looked at far distances so long, they seemed to have trouble focusing on a thing right in front of them. He wore a buffalo coat. Of course he did. Of course the man who had ended the buffalo wore their skin against the cold. And he watched a starving Indian woman lead a broken-down horse into his yard with 2 half-frozen children, and his face did not change at all, and that stillness was more frightening than anger would have been. She stopped a respectful distance off. She got the girl down, and then the boy, and she stood between them with a hand on each, and she lifted her chin and spoke, in the trade tongue, the plain sign, and the broken English and Cree that men used with each other in that country, and she had practiced the words through the whole last mile, so her voice would not shake, and it did not. I am not begging. That first, because it was the one thing she had left that was hers. I have work in my hands. I am a healer. I can doctor a wound or a fever better than any man west of the mission. I can tan a hide soft. I can sew. I can cook. I can keep a place. These are my sister's children. My sister's dead. My people are dying at the 2 medicine because the buffalo are gone and the agent steals the beef. She let that sit one breath, and she watched his face when she said the buffalo are gone, and she saw it. The smallest flinch, deep down, quickly buried, a man touched on an old wound through his coat. I am asking to work through the winter, for food for these 2, not for me. I will eat what is left over, or I will eat nothing. In the spring, if you want us gone, we go. I ask for 1 winter. The man looked at her a long time. Then he looked at the boy, who had straightened himself and set his jaw and was doing his best to look like someone worth feeding, and at the girl, who had turned her face into Sitsiki's leg. Something moved in the deep-set eyes, far back, and was gone. You come a long way to ask a hide hunter for help, he said at last. His voice was rough and slow, a voice that did not get much use. There was a bitterness in the word hide hunter that he had put there himself. That had nothing to do with her. I came to the man who has food, she said. What he was before is his to carry. It is not my business unless he makes it my business. Something that might, in another face, have been the ghost of a bitter smile touched the corner of his mouth and did not stay. He looked past her, out at the scoured white plain she had come across, and she saw him reckon it. The distance, the wind of the last 2 nights, the 2 small children. And she saw him understand what it had taken to cross it, because he was a man who knew that country, and knowing it, he could not pretend to himself that this was anything but what it was. Get them in out of the cold, he said, and turned and held the door. Before you lose the little one's toes. The inside of the cabin was 1 long room, warm, blessedly, achingly warm, and dim, and it smelled of wood smoke and grease and old whiskey and the leather of stacked trade goods. There were bales of blankets and boxes of goods along one wall, a plank counter, a good stone hearth with a fire built high, a bunk, a table, and, on pegs and nails everywhere, the tools of the man's trades, past and present. Traps, a skinning knife, ropes, and racked along the wall 3 of the long, heavy rifles, the buffalo guns, the sharps that could kill at half a mile, hanging there, useless now that there was nothing left to point them at, and she understood, without being told, that he kept them there the way a man keeps a thing he cannot look at and cannot throw away. He did not fuss over them, and he did not speak much. He pointed with his chin at the corner nearest the fire, and she understood that it was to be theirs, and she got the children down out of their frozen wrappings and went to work on them at once with a healer's hands, checking the girl's feet and the boy's, and the man watched her do it, and when he saw she knew what she was about, that she knew to warm the frozen flesh slow and not fast, that she knew the danger, something in his shoulders eased by a fraction. Then he went to the shed without a word and came back with a haunch of frozen elk, and he cut from it generously more meat than the three of them had seen in a month, and he set a pot going himself, and while it cooked he sat across the room cleaning a rifle he had not fired, because it gave his hands something to do that was not looking at them, and none of them spoke. And the smell of the meat filled the cabin, and the little girl began, silently, to cry at the smell of it. And the man heard her, and his hands went still on the rifle for a moment, and then went on. When the meat was ready, he filled bowls and gave the children theirs, and set one down in front of Sitsíki too. And when she began to say that she would eat only what was left over, he said, without heat, not looking at her, "Eat. A worn-out woman is no use to me and no use to them. Eat, or you're no bargain." And she understood that he had given her away to keep her pride and take the food both. And she took it, and she ate, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted,
And she had to stop twice because her throat closed on it. That first night none of them slept but the children, who slept the deep, drugged sleep of the fed and the warm. Sitsíki lay with them and kept her knife near,
not because she had decided to fear the man, but because trust was a thing she no longer gave to anyone on the strength of one meal, and she listened to him across the room. He did not sleep either.
Long into the dark she heard him get up and cross to the wall and stand a while, and she thought at first he was going for the rifles, and her hand found the knife, but he was only standing there in the dark before the three long guns. The buffalo guns, standing before them the way a man stands before graves. And after a long time he went back to his bunk and lay down, and she understood that whatever this man was, the thing that made him dangerous was not aimed at her, and never would be. It was aimed every hour of his life at himself. They did not become anything all at once. Those who tell such stories afterward like to say that a hard winter melts people together, that need makes love. But it is not like that, or not only like that. It is slower and stranger. It is made of 10,000 small things, most of them wordless, and it can go either way for a long time before it sets. The man's name, she learned, was Baptiste. The freighters called him that, half French, and there was Cree in him somewhere back, and American, and the mix of him was the mix of that whole borderland country. He did not offer his story, and she did not ask for it. She learned him the way you learn weather, by watching. She learned that he rose before light, and saw to the horses, and split wood in the black cold, as though the work were a punishment he had assigned himself. She learned that he could go a whole day and speak 9 words. She learned that he drank in the evenings from a jug he kept by the hearth, steadily, not like a man chasing pleasure, but like a man taking medicine that did not work, and that he was never loud with it and never cruel with it, only went further and further away behind his eyes until he was somewhere she could not see. And then he slept. And she learned, within the first week, the shape of his wound, though it was a month before he ever spoke of it. It was the boy who found it, the way children find the true thing without knowing they are looking. Maki, warmed and fed, and turning back toward being a boy, had gone poking along the wall where the trade goods were stacked, and he had found, behind the bales, a great bundle of buffalo robes, prime robes, thick winter hides, a small fortune of them, the last of the man's trade, unsold because the bottom had fallen out of everything when the herds ended. And the boy, who had been born into the very last days of the buffalo and could barely remember them, had pulled one out and buried his face and his hands in the deep fur of it, and had said in his own tongue, wondering, "It's so warm. Was there ever so many of these that a person could be cold and still have one?" And Baptiste, who had been at the counter, went very still. He did not understand the words. He did not need to. He looked at the child with his face in the buffalo robe, and something happened behind his pale eyes that Sitsíki, watching, thought for a moment was going to break him open where he stood. He set down what was in his hands, and he went out into the cold without his coat. And he was gone a long time, and when he came back his face was closed again, but she had seen it, and she knew.
That night, for the first time, he did not go to the jug. The children thawed the way children do.
Faster than seemed possible, faster than was fair, given what they carried. Poeta, the little girl, was first, because she was 4, and grief could not hold her against the pull of the world for long.
There was the dog, a huge rough brute called, she gathered, nothing at all, that had frightened her at first and within a week was letting her sleep against its flank by the fire. There were the horses to visit, and the marvel of the mountain standing right there out the door, and Baptiste, who did not know how to be around a child, and so simply let her follow him. And one morning Sitsíki looked out and saw the big man crouched at the corral with the little girl beside him, his huge scarred hands showing her small ones how to hold them flat to feed a horse so it would not take her fingers, and neither of them was speaking, the man because he had no words for children, and the child because she had learned in the dying camp to be silent, and the two silences sat side by side and were, for that moment, a kind of peace. The boy took longer, the way the boy always does. Mayaki had made himself the man of his family too young, had watched his father die and his mother die, and had decided somewhere that it was his to keep the rest alive. And he watched Baptiste with a wary, aching, jealous attention, wanting to be taught, furious at the wanting, resentful that they had needed to come to a stranger at all, feeling it as a verdict on his own failure, though no child should ever have carried such a thing. He worked himself past exhaustion, carrying wood, and would not admit tiredness. It was Baptiste who broke it, in his own slow, graceless way. One gray morning he took down from the wall, not one of the great buffalo guns, but a small rifle, an old but good carbine, and he put it in the boy's hands and said, through Sitsíki, "Tell him a man should know how to feed his people. Tell him I'll teach him to shoot straight. But he minds me exactly, or we stop, because a gun's got no forgiveness in it." And he took the boy out into the snow and set up a chunk of wood on a stump, and he taught him patiently, more patiently than Sitsíki would have guessed the man had in him. How to breathe, how to hold, how to squeeze and not pull. And when the boy at last hit the wood square and it jumped off the stump, Baptiste did not smile or praise him. He only nodded once, and the boy carried that single nod around inside him for a week like a warm coal. The winter closed its fist. There were days the cold was too great to do more than keep the fire and huddle. Sitsíki set the cabin to rights the way she would have kept any lodge, and hung her drying herbs from the rafters until the place smelled of them instead of old whiskey, and cooked and mended and doctored the small hurts of the winter. And Baptiste ate what she made and said nothing, but he ate all of it. And once she caught him with his eyes closed and his face turned to the smell of the pot, looking like a man remembering a house he had lived in long ago. She learned that he was fair, which surprised her.
He divided the meat evenly and gave the children the better of it. He never raised his voice, not to her, not to the children, not even to the dog. When the coffee ran low, he drank his weak and made theirs strong.
And she came to understand that the danger the men spoke of was real, but that it pointed inward, that this was a man holding something at bay with all his strength, and that her coming, and the children's, had done something to the balance of that long private war, had given him for the first time in 3 winters a reason to get up that was not simply the animal habit of not yet being dead. One deep night the little girl woke, screaming from a dream of the dying camp, of the cold and the wrapped shapes and her mother going away, and she could not be reached, thrashing in the grip of a terror too big for her small body. And Sitsíki held her and could not quiet her. And then the big man was there in the dark, kneeling by them, awkward and enormous, and he did the only thing he knew, which was that he began, low and rough and badly, to sing. It was an old voyageur's song, a paddling song, French words worn smooth, a thing from his own childhood in some other country of his life. And it had no meaning for the child at all. And it did not matter because the meaning was in the low, steady grain of a big, safe voice in the dark, and the child quieted against it and slept. And Baptiste stayed there on his knees on the cold floor a while, and Sitsíki saw that his eyes were wet, and she looked away to give him the privacy of it, and neither of them ever spoke of that night. But in the morning he brought in extra wood and built the fire up higher than his careful habit, which was the only way he had of saying the thing he could not say, and she accepted it the only way she had, by cooking him the best of the meat and setting it before him without a word. It was near the middle of the winter that he finally told her. They had gotten into the way by then of sitting up a while after the children slept, not talking, only sharing the fire, and the jug had been standing untouched for many nights. And one night he looked into the flames a long time, and then he began to speak in his slow, rough English, and she let him and did not look at him, because she understood he could only say it to the fire. He told her about the good years, about coming out young and finding the herds and the money in them, more money than a nobody from nowhere had ever dreamed of, $40 a day, 60, a fortune, for nothing but the pull of a trigger against animals so many and so tame in their numbers that they would stand grazing while he dropped one and then the next and the next, a whole stand, 50, 80, 100 beasts from a single hidden rest, the great bodies falling and the rest not even lifting their heads. He told her about the skinners coming behind, and the hides going east by the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, the millions to be made into belts to drive the machines in the factories, and how no one out there had thought for one moment that it could end. Because how could you end a thing that was like the grass, like the sky? And then 1 year, he said, there wasn't a stand to be found. And the next year, there wasn't a herd. And the year after, there wasn't nothing but bones, whole prairies of bones, white as far as you could see, and the wind blowing through 'em. He was quiet a while. I done that. Me and men, like me. We done it in 10 years, a thing the good Lord took forever to make, and we done it for hatbands and machine belts and left the meat to rot. Enough meat to feed every soul on these plains for 100 years, and we left it in the sun. He turned his head and looked at her at last, and there was no self-pity in his face, only a plain, terrible knowledge. And now your people are starving. Your sister's dead. Those children come across 40 miles of hell, because there's nothing left to eat in a country that used to be the richest on God's earth, and I helped do that. So don't you thank me for the meat. Don't you ever thank me. I got no right to it. Sitsíki was quiet a long time. The fire ticked and settled. She thought of many things she might say and discarded them, because most of what people say at such moments is for the comfort of the one saying it and not the one who has to hear it. At last she said only, "My grandmother told me a thing." She said a man is not the worst hour of his life. She said the worst hour is only the seed. What grows from it is the man. She looked at him. You are feeding them. Whatever you did in the good years, tonight there are 2 children of the people asleep and warm and fed under your roof. And that is also a thing you have done, and it is happening now, and the other is finished and gone. You do not get to keep only the guilt, because the guilt is easier to hold than the work of doing better. That is a coward's way, and whatever you are, I have watched you a winter now, and you are not a coward. He did not answer her, but something eased in him, some tension she had not fully seen until it left. And after a while he got up, and instead of going to the jug, he banked the fire for the night, careful, and lay down and slept, she thought, better than he had. And in the morning he took the boy out shooting again, and taught him with more life in it than before, as though something that had been merely endured had begun, faintly, to matter. They were not a family yet, but a fire has to be small before it can be large, and this one had caught. Trouble in that country came the way it always came, on good horses, in good coats, out of the low country, smiling. The thaw was still far off when they came. 5 men riding up out of the south in a hard, bright afternoon on grained horses that had not wintered on cottonwood bark. Sitsíki knew the look of the lead man before she could see his face, knew it from the agency, from the ration line. The look of a man who had decided the world was his and was only reckoning the cost of the taking. Baptiste knew them by name. He went out to meet them with a buffalo gun in the crook of his arm, the big one this time, and she understood the choosing of it, and he did not ask them to get down. The leader was a wolfer named Sourdough Charlie, who ran a crew poisoning wolves for the cattle outfits that were pushing up into the emptied buffalo country, seeding the carcasses of the last game with strychnine and skinning what the poison killed. He was a big, genial, rotten man, and he had ridden with Baptiste in the Hyde days, and he talked like an old friend, about the weather, about the good years, about how a man had to keep making his way. And then he got to it. Word had come up from the agency, he said, still friendly. Seemed there was an Indian woman run off from the 2 medicine with 2 agency children. The agent wanted them back, wanted all his Indians counted, and on the rolls where the government could see how few he had to feed, because a dead Indian off the rolls was money in a man's pocket and a live one run off was a loose end. There was a bounty on strays. Not much. But Charlie was a man who picked up money where it lay, and here it lay, and he'd heard the woman had come up Baptiste's way. He looked past Baptiste at the cabin, at Sitsíki in the door with the children behind her, and his genial face did something small and ugly and satisfied. "So that's them," he said. "Well now, be no trouble at all, Bat. We'll take 'em off your hands. Half the bounty to you for the keeping. Neighborly." The silence stretched. "They're mine," Baptiste said. 2 words, flat as the frozen ground. Charlie's smile widened because he had found the soft place, the lever. "Yours." He looked at Sitsíki again, longer, in a way that made the boy step in front of his little sister without being told. "I get it. Long winter. Man gets lonesome. But that don't change the paper, and it don't change the bounty, and it surely don't change that there's 5 of us and 1 of you, old friend, and you're not the shot you was when you had something to shoot." He leaned on his saddle horn. "Be ashamed to fall out over a squaw, and a couple of agency brats you'll be sick of come spring. Sign 'em over. We'll even leave you the girl a few days if you're fond," he grinned. "Neighborly." And Sitsíki, watching from the door, saw Baptiste's shoulders change, saw the gaunt, drunk, grieving man she had wintered with go somewhere else, somewhere cold and level and terribly quiet, and she understood that Sourdough Charlie, who thought he was reading an old broken friend, had just made a mistake he could not see. "Right off my ground, Charlie," Baptiste said, very softly. "Right now, all 5. Bat, you poisoned the last of the elk in the sweet grass with your baits," Baptiste went on in that same soft, level voice, not raising the gun, not needing to. "I found 'em. Whole family of 'em dead in the snow around a poisoned carcass killed for the hide off their backs. Same as we done to the buffalo, same exact thing. And I stood there and I thought, that's it, then. That's the last of it. There's men who won't stop till the whole world's bones." His pale eyes did not blink. "I've been 3 winters trying to figure why I ought to get up in the morning. You just rode up here and give me a reason. So you go on and count. 5 of you, 1 of me. But I've killed more living things than any man in this territory, Charlie. I'm the worst man on these plains. For exactly that. And if you don't turn those horses around, I am going to start the day's work with you. And the man behind me can have him a try after, and we'll see, does the arithmetic hold?" He paused. "The difference between us, Charlie, is you've still got something to lose. I put mine in the ground 3 winters back. You want to bet your life against a man who don't care if he sees tomorrow? Go on, bet it." It was very quiet. The horses shifted. Sourdough Charlie's genial face worked, and Sitsíki watched him do the sum that all such men can do faster than any other, the sum of leverage, and watched him feel it come out wrong. A man will not die for a small bounty. A man will especially not die going first against someone who has plainly stopped fearing death, because there is no threat you can make against such a man, and nothing you can take from him that he has not already lost. Charlie had come to collect from a broken drunk and had found instead a man with nothing left to lose standing between him and a family, and there is not a coward alive. And men like Charlie are always under the bluster cowards who will spend his own precious life against odds like that for money. "Easy, Bat," Charlie said, and the smile was gone now, and something careful had come into his voice. "Easy, no call for that. Just business." He gathered his reins. "Just business." And he turned his horse, and the others turned theirs, and they rode back down toward the low country, unhurried, trying to keep it looking like a choice, and Baptiste stood in the yard with the great gun in his arm and watched them until they were only dark specks on the white, and then until they were nothing. That night the cabin was very quiet. The children slept. Sitsíki sat across the fire from him and said the thing she had to say. "He will not let it go," she said. "Men like that go away and come back with more, or they go to the agent and come back with the law, which is worse, because you cannot point a gun at the law." She had thought it all through, the way she thought through everything. "And I will not have you die for us. You gave us the winter. There is no debt. In the morning I will take the children north to the free bands across the medicine line, in the grandmother's country, where the agent's paper does not reach. It is far, but the wind has changed, and—" No. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way he had told Charlie to ride off, the way that ended a thing. He looked into the fire a long time, and then he told her the last of it, the thing under all the other things. "I had a wife," he said, "Cree woman, down on the milk in the good years, and a boy. And when the sickness came through, the coughing sickness, the winter of the first hard fail, I was off east selling hides, chasing money we didn't even need no more. I had a fortune already, and I went for more. And by the time I got back, they were 3 weeks in the ground, and nobody'd even known where to send word." He was quiet. "I've thought every day since about how I wasn't there, how I chose the money, how I was always choosing the money, right up till there wasn't nothing left to buy with it and nobody left to buy it for." He raised his eyes to hers. "So don't talk to me about no debt, and don't talk to me about taking those children off into the cold to keep me safe. I have been safe for 3 years. Safe is just the word I've been using for waiting to die. I am done choosing the thing that keeps me safe over the thing that keeps them alive. Charlie can bring the law. Charlie can bring the army. I am not moving, and neither are you, and we will meet whatever comes here together, because I have run out of tomorrows to save myself for, and I would rather spend the ones I got left on this than on nothing at all." He did not say, "I love you," or "Stay," or "You are mine." Charlie had said that last for him, and he had not corrected it, and now he had said this instead, which was more, and Sitsíki understood that they had crossed a river in the dark without either of them naming the water. The waiting that followed was its own hardship, worse in its way than the fight would have been, because it only sat and grew. But Baptiste did with it what he had done with everything that winter. He turned it into teaching. He showed the boy where a family could go if the cabin had to be left in a hurry, up a cut in the rock behind the place where one rifle could hold off many, and he provisioned it quiet, a robe and dried meat and powder, in the days after Charlie came. He showed the little girl gently, made a game of being small and still and quiet as a stone, so the game would be in her hands if ever the terror came. He was doing for these children. Sitsíki understood, watching him, exactly what no one had been able to do for her sister's children in the dying camp, and exactly what no one had done for his own. He was giving them a plan, a place, a thing to hold, so that if the worst came, they would not simply be prey in the dark. It was, she thought, a kind of prayer he was making with his hands, a thing offered up late to the wife and boy in the ground on the milk, and she did not tell him she saw it, because some things a man must be allowed to do without being watched. They did not wait to be surprised. That was Sitsíki's doing, and it was the moment she stopped being a stranger sheltering under the man's roof and became the other half of the thing they were building. "You are thinking like a hunter," she told him. "You are thinking about how to win the fight when they come. But my grandmother did not keep the people alive through the hard winters by winning fights. She kept them alive by making the fight not worth the fighting. Listen." And she laid it out for him, the plan she had turned over in the long nights, and she watched something come into his face that she had not seen there before. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, the look of a man realizing that the woman across his fire had a mind on her like a honed blade. The agent's whole power, she said, was that no one saw him. He starved his people in a far country where no important eyes ever came, and stole the beef, and let the rolls thin because thin rolls were money, and no one who mattered ever knew or cared. His power was the darkness he worked in. So they would not fight the darkness with a rifle. They would let the light in. Baptiste knew men from the Hyde days, knew a newspaper man in Fort Benton who had ridden out once to write the great romantic story of the buffalo hunt, and had stayed to write instead a bitter one about its ending, a man with a conscience gone raw. And there was the black robe, the mission priest, who had been begging his church and the government both for relief for the starving Picani and being ignored, and who wanted, more than anything on earth, proof, names, numbers, a witness who would say plainly what was happening at the Two Medicine while the agent's smokehouse stood full. So Baptiste rode, not toward Charlie, not toward the agency, but away and around 4 hard days down to Fort Benton, while Sitsíki kept the place with the boy on watch and the carbine by the door, and he came back with more than supplies. He came back having done the thing Charlie and the agent could never have imagined a broken-hide man doing. He had talked. He had sat with the newspaper man and told him everything. The empty rolls, the full smokehouse, the beef sold off the back of the agency, the bounty on strays, the wolfers poisoning, the last of the game, the whole rotten arithmetic of it. And the newspapermen had written it down, all of it, with names, and had sent it east on the wire, and had promised to write up himself when the passes cleared. And the priest had the names now, too, and was writing to his bishop and to men in Washington who could not, once a thing was written down and witnessed and printed, quite so easily pretend not to know. It was not a gunfight, and that was the whole of the point, and it was the thing Charlie and the agent didn't understand, because they were men of the closing frontier and could not feel the ground shifting under them. The day was ending when a man could starve a people in the dark and take what he wanted with 5 riders and a smile. The day was coming, slowly, unevenly, too late for so many, when a thing written down could matter more than a gun. It was a corrupt age, and the paper more often served the Charlies than their victims, but not always. And a woman with nothing left to lose, Sitsíki had learned, must become very good at finding the not always. They came, in the end, as she had known they would, but not 5 riders in the afternoon. Sourdough Charlie came in the gray before dawn with the agency policeman and a paper, thinking to do it under color of law, thinking to find them asleep. But the dog was awake and the boy was awake. Maki prowled on the middle watch, and by the time they reached the corral, Baptiste stood in the open door with the buffalo gun, and Sitsíki was at the shuttered window with the carbine, and Charlie could see it would not be the easy thing he had been promised. The agency policeman had the paper, and he read it, an order to return the agency Indians. And Baptiste let him finish, and then he said, across the frozen yard, in a voice that carried flat and cold, "You can take that paper back to the agent, and you can tell him a thing. Tell him his name's gone east on the wire out of Benton. Tell him there's a newspaper man coming up the trail with the thaw to count his smokehouse, and his rolls, and his graves. Tell him the black robes got his numbers, and the bishops got the black robes' letter. The whole country's about to know exactly what starved the Piikani this winter, and it wasn't the buffalo. It was a fat man with a pencil selling their beef." He paused. "Now, he can be the agent who murdered his Indians for money, with his name in every paper back east. Or he can be the man who let one woman and 2 children stay north where they're being fed, and looked the other way, and maybe found his rolls and his smokehouse in better order before that newspaperman gets here. His pick. But he takes these 2 over my body, and mine'll be one more name in the story, and that's the last thing on this earth that man wants. One more name." And he looked at Sourdough Charlie, and he said, "And you, Charlie, you're in the story too now, the poison, the sweetgrass elk, all of it. You want to be the man standing next to the agent when this breaks, or you want to be gone?" It was a strange kind of confrontation, and the strangeness was the whole of it. Charlie had come prepared for a fight he could win or a bluff he could break. He had not come prepared to be outflanked by a woman's mind and a dead man's conscience, to find that the fight had already been fought and lost somewhere he could not reach in ink days ago. And the agency policeman was only a poor man doing a job he hated, and he had no wish at all to be a name in an Eastern paper. He looked at the agent's paper in his hand, and he looked at the 2 thin, resolute figures in the door and window, and he made the small human calculation of a man who wants to go home alive and unfamous, and he folded the paper and put it in his coat. "I'll tell him what you said," he told Baptiste. And to Charlie, "I'm going back, you do what you want," and he turned his horse. Charlie sat a long moment in the cold dawn, and Sitsíki watched him feel the leverage move under him and reverse, watched the sum come out against him one final time, and then he wheeled his horse without a word and rode down toward the low country, and there was nothing certain left in the way he rode. No shot had been fired. That was the victory, and it was hers as much as his, and when the riders were gone she came out into the yard and stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, and for a long time neither of them said anything at all, because the not losing was so large and so good that words would only have made it smaller. The spring came to that country the way it always came, not gently, but all at once, in a green rush, as if the land had been holding its breath through the long white months and let it out in a single week. The 2 Medicine and every coulee ran brown and loud with snowmelt. The mountains dropped their lower snow and stood black and white against a sky gone suddenly enormous and blue. The horses shed their winter shag in handfuls and rolled in the new mud like colts. The newspaper man came up with the thaw, as he had promised, and rode on to the agency, and the story that had gone east on the wire became a story printed in full, with the names in it, and there was at last the small, ugly spectacle of important men in far cities being made to notice a thing they had chosen not to notice, and the agent was removed, quietly, with no admission of anything, the way such men are always removed, to fail upward somewhere else, and relief was ordered, late, too late for the 4th of the Piikani already in the ground, but not too late for those still living, and Sitsíki's people, what was left of them, did not all die that spring, which was the most that could be said, and was not nothing, and had been bought partly with ink she and a broken hide man had spilled. She went back, once the trails were open down to the two medicine, on a good horse now, with Baptiste and the children, to see what was left and to do the thing that had to be done. Her sister's scaffold still stood in the cottonwoods, and the ground was soft now, and she buried her at last, properly, with the words, and Baptiste stood back with his hat in his hands the whole while, a hide man at the grave of one of the Hungers dead, and did not speak. And when it was done, he said only to Sitsíki, "Lo, I'll carry her too, alongside mine. That's the least a man can do, carry the names." And she understood it, for the vow it was. They did not speak of going, come spring. She had said in the killing cold of the fall one winter, and in the spring, if you want us gone, we go. Spring came, and no one spoke of it. Instead, they built. The country was changing, and
A man could file on land now, even against the mountains, and Baptiste rode down and filed, proper, witnessed, stamped on the ground his cabin stood on, and the good grass around it, so that no Charlie could ever come with a paper again.
And he and the boy cut and hauled and raised a second room onto the cabin, so the children had a place of their own. And the raising of it was Myaki's real coming of age, more than any rifle. The day he set a log with his own strength, and Baptiste said, in front of Sitsíki, "He's a better hand than most grown men I've hired." And the boy had to turn and study the horizon very hard so no one would see his face. She planted. She broke the black bottom ground below the cabin and put in the things she had carried the seed of, wrapped in a twist of hide, all that terrible winter, a garden the beginning of one, and she taught the little girl the songs that went with the planting, the ones that thanked the seed for agreeing to become food, and Poita sang them in her high clear voice, and Baptiste, mending harness nearby, listened without letting on that he listened. And the man changed most of all. It was not sudden, and it was not complete. He would always be a man with a well of dark in him, a man who needed the high silence, and walked out alone sometimes to stand and look at the mountains. But the ghost went out of him, over that spring and summer, by degrees. He drank less, and then one day she noticed not at all. The jug stood in its corner and gathered dust, and neither of them remarked on it. He spoke more. He laughed once or twice, a rusty, astonished sound, as if he had found a tool he thought long lost. And he did a thing that told her more than any of it. He took down the 3 great buffalo guns from the wall, the sharps that had killed the world, and he did not throw them in the river as she half expected, but cleaned them and wrapped them in oiled cloth and put them away in a chest out of sight, and said, "A man shouldn't have to look at his worst thing every day, but he shouldn't throw it in the river neither, and pretend it never was. He should just put it where he can get to it, if he ever needs reminding what he's not going back to." And she thought that was as near to wisdom as most people ever come. He found other work for his skill. He did not hunt for hides ever again. There were no hides to hunt, and he would not have if there had been. But he hunted for meat, honestly, taking what was needed and no more, thanking the animal in the way she taught him, and he began, too, a thing that surprised them both. With the last of the hide money, and with the standing he had among the freighters and the traders, he set himself against the wolfers and the poisoners quietly at first, and then not quietly. A hide man turned protector of the last of the game, the worst poacher on the plains, become the hardest man in the country to poison an elk in front of. It did not undo what was done. He knew that. He never once pretended otherwise. But he had learned the thing Sitsíki's grandmother knew, that a man is not the worst hour of his life, but what he grows from it, and he was growing, late and hard and real, in the only ground he had, which was the ruin he himself had made. That first full summer set them, the way a thing left in the sun hardens to its lasting shape. There was, at the edge of the nearest settlement, another family working a hard claim, a Métis widow and her grown sons who had felt the same wolfer's weight. and the two households took a careful liking to one another and an understanding, without quite saying it, that they would look out for each other, send word if riders came, because two households standing together were harder to break than one. And Sitsíki's own surviving people, some of them drifted up as the summer went, a family, and then another, to the good grass by the mountains where there was a woman of the Piekani who knew medicine and a strange, changed-hide man who did not turn Indians away. And a small camp grew there that was neither wholly the old way nor the new, but some third thing, a thing suited to surviving what could not be undone. The boy made his first real hunt that summer and came back walking 3 inches taller behind a deer he had taken clean, and the whole small camp ate of it, and they made the old quiet ceremony over it, the boy thanking the deer, and Baptiste stood back and let Sitsíki lead the words because they were her people's words, and she saw him watching the boy with something on his face. A stranger could not have read, but that she read easily now, having learned his face, the way you learn a country you mean to live in. It was pride. It was a father's pride. He never said the word. He did not need to. It happened in the end over something small, the way the largest things always do. It was late summer, the light gone long and gold in the evenings, the garden heavy and the mountains hazed blue with the far fires of the dry season. The little girl had fallen from the corral rail and skinned her leg badly and cried, and Baptiste had scooped her up in his huge hands and held her still while Sitsíki cleaned it and bound it with the yarrow. And the child, in her hurt, without thinking, the way children say the truest things, had reached up and called him by the word that meant father. The cabin went very still. He did not say anything, he did not correct her, he only sat there with the small girl against his chest, and his hand, that scarred, huge hand that had killed more living things than any man on the plains, came up very slowly and rested on the child's dark head as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. And Sitsíki, kneeling with the poultice in her hands, looked up and found him looking at her over the child's head, and everything neither of them had said in a year of silences was in that one look, and it did not need saying, and so it was not said. Later, when the children slept, they sat outside in the warm dark with the whole enormous wheel of stars turning overhead, and for a while neither spoke. She didn't mean anything by it, Sitsíki said finally, offering him the way out, because offering people the way out was a habit of hers. Children say, I know what children say. A pause. Somewhere a night bird called, and I know what I'd want him to be able to say. If you... He stopped. He was a man who had unlearned the words for this a long time ago, and had to find them again one at a time in the dark, like stones for a river crossing. I'm not asking you to forget him. Your man, their father. I wouldn't ask that of anybody. I know to the bone what it costs to be asked it. He meant his own, the wife and boy on the milk. She understood. I'm only saying there's room here, for all of 'em, him and my two in the stories we tell the children by the fire so nobody gets left in the cold, and room for... The last word came hardest of anything she had ever heard him say. Us, if you want it, and if you don't, that's a whole thing too, and you'll have this place as long as you want it, you and them, and I'll not say another word. It was, she thought, the longest string of words she had ever heard him put together, and everyone had cost him, and that was how she knew. She did not answer with a word. She reached across the small dark distance and put her hand over his, over that great, scarred hand, and she felt it turn under hers and close around it, careful, as if her hand were a thing that could break, as if it were the most precious thing he had held in a very long time. They were not, even then, a perfect happiness, and she made herself be honest with herself about that in the dark. There would be hard winters still. The buffalo were not coming back. Nothing was coming back. The old free life was gone off the earth, and no love and no cabin and no filed claim could bring back the black rivers on the grass, or the vast, unfenced world, or her sister, or his wife and boy, or the fourth of her people the hunger had already taken. Grief does not end. It only makes room, if you let it, for other things to grow up alongside it, the way the small tough flowers grew in the cracks of the rock where nothing had any business living at all. But they had made a family out of strangers and out of ruin, out of hunger and guilt and a long shared winter and a voyager's song sung badly in the dark. And a family, she had come to understand, was not only the thing you were born into and could lose. A family was also the thing you decided, over and over, in the cold, to keep alive. It was a choice you made every morning when you built up the fire. It was a fire you tended precisely because you knew, better than anyone, how easily and how completely it could go out. The stars turned overhead, the same stars that had looked down so indifferently on her a year before, when she stood among the scaffolds at the Two Medicine and swore to her dead sister that she would keep the children alive and did not know how. They did not seem indifferent now. Or perhaps they were exactly as indifferent as they had always been, and the only thing that had changed was her. A woman sitting in the warm dark with her hand in a good man's changed hand. Her sister's children sleeping safe and fed. The garden heavy in the black ground she had broken with her own two hands in a country that had tried its hardest to kill them all, and had not, in the end, quite managed it. Either way, she thought, it was enough. It was more than enough. Against all the cold arithmetic of that country and that age, it was a life, earned, imperfect, bought too dear, and quietly, stubbornly going on. Down in the dark bottom a coyote called, and another answered, and the old dog lifted its head and listened, and finding all well, lay back down, and it was well. For now, in the small circle of firelight they had made against the enormous dark, it was well.